Hi guys, you're welcome back to the second module of this application of how to synchronize Sqlite data to MySQL database online. That's to the server. In this second module, we're going to deal with the front end, which is the Android development using Java classes, and the Sqlite database to retain the data and push them to the calling server PHP codes. So I'll be moving straight to Android Studio, the source file of this particular application, and I'll be explaining in details the necessary modules in this particular session. First of all, the build Gradle. In the dependencies, we have the COM Android support version 4 19.1.0, this particular one, and we have the com.google.code, that's the JSON, which is relative to JSON. And we have the compile files, which is the Android async HTTP 1.4.4 jar file. We also have the Android support app compat version 7 19.1.0. After including all these dependencies, you synchronize Gradle and you set your application ready for using the appropriate classes. From here, I'll be going to the rest, the layout, files. We have the activity main XML, add new user XML, the view user entry XML. These are three major XMLs in this particular application. The activity main is the launcher activity, while the add new user is a kind of activity that enables you to add a new user to which is going to be stored in the SQLite database, while the view user entry is actually going to display these stored data, and you have the access to synchronize to the MySQL database which sits right on the server. In the activity main XML, there is the design layout. For one reason or the other, the rendering is not actually rendering appropriately. So there's a problem, probably because of the APIs that we're using. We're using API 19, and this is Android Studio 2.2.3. which needs API 21. So that's what is actually causing the rendering library not to display. But with that, we can move to the text. We can still make use of the text file, which is the metadata of the UI. We have a relative layout with the layout with a night match parent, and the context is calling the main activity class. Inside this relative layout, we have another relative layout which makes it nested. We assign an ID to it called the relative layout 1 with the layout with a night field parent, and the height is 40 dp. The background color is wine, while the rotation is vertical. We have a text view with an ID of text view 1, the layout with an ID also wrap content, and the text color is white. So white text right on the background of wine. Now the first button here is the button for add user. If you notice, we have an on-click listener set to this button with a text plus, just like the sign of adding, and the text color of this particular button is wine with a text size of 30 sp, a closing relative layout. We have another relative layout, so this makes two relative layouts right inside the parent relative layout. The rotation of vertical, the layout margin top 40 dp, so there's going to be a margin at the top of this particular layout, and the layout below it is the ID relative layout. Definitely is going to sit below the first relative layout. So this has a list view, so this is actually going to enable us to have the list item of all entry being input into the database. We have an ID of it called list, the layout with a night match parent and wrap content, and is aligned the parent left true. A closing list view, a closing relative layout, and a closing parent relative layout. Let's look at the add new user XML. There's a linear layout with the layout with a night match parent. The background is gray. The rotation is vertical, while the padding top is 1 dp. We have a text view here with an ID of text view 1. The same thing goes with the layout with an height, match parent, and wrap content. The background is kind of wine as we have it for the previous layout. And the padding is 5 dp. We have a text on this called add user, and the text color is white. A relative layout follows with a layout width and height, match parent, a background of white, just like the way we have for the previous layout. Now the text of this is the user, so it's actually calling from the string user. So there's a text view for the user, because this is add new user. It's actually going to have a sort of input string, which we are still going there, where we have the edit text that takes up the username, so that you have the ability to get the user data from the input field, which is the edit text. Now the layout width of this is wrap content, and we have a hint right on this edit text, which is enter the user's name calling from the string int name, and it has a request focus. It's actually focused on that edit text. A closing edit text, and we have two buttons here. The first button is saving the input text, while on the save of this button it triggers the onClick handler, which is the add new user. So once you click this, it eventually triggers the add new user method in the Java class. Another button here is cancelling out what you've actually imputed. So the onClick listener to this is the cancel add user method, which is actually going to be in the Java class as well. A closing relative layout for all this, and the closing linear layout for the outer view. Let's get to look at the view user entry. This is actually going to view populate the entries that were made. It's a linear layout with the layout width and height, field parent, and wrap content respectively, with the orientation of vertical, and a text view of with assign an ID to equal user ID, layout width and height, field parent, and wrap content. The visibility is gone at this time because it's actually going to be refreshing as each input file is being added up. We have a text view that actually goes on to an ID of username. This for the user ID rather, and this for the username. An ID is attached to each username. Now the layout width and height, field parent, and wrap content. We have some margin around it to the bottom, to the top, all 5 dp, and we assign a padding also, so that the text view is actually going to sit appropriately on your mobile device or any device that actually populates this UI. Padding top, also 6 dp. A text color, which is a sort of green, so the color of the font will be green, and the text size is 70 sp, while the text style will be bold. So this text is actually going to be thick. A closing linear layout. Let's see, the design view still having the rendering problem, but that's fine. We can move further. We move ahead to the Java classes. In these Java classes, we have the DB controller, the main activity, and the new user. The DB controller I would like us to look at the main activity first, which is the launcher activity of this particular application. The main activity extends the action bar activity, where we create the class to perform the DB related operations. We instantiate the DB controller, create an object from equal to controller, and also the same thing goes for the progress dialog. We'll need a progress dialog where we create a PLG dialog object. We then create method call on the activity main, which I've explained earlier, and we're going to get the user records from the Sqlite database with the array list, whereby we create an object user list. We pass in the hash map and the string, and we get all users method. This is actually very important, and we test for the list. That's the user list object being created after getting all the users record. We'd get the size. If the size is not equal to 0, it's going to set the user array list in the list view. So if the size is actually not equal to 0, it's going to actually populate the list. Now we need the list adapter. Create an adapter. We actually get the simple adapter to the main activity, which is this particular class, the user list, and we call on the layout view user entry XML. So this is when the user entry XML, which is the XML that populates the view, is going to be attached right there to the activity main. So can you get the idea from there? And we have the my list object created from the list view, and this is how we're actually going to attach them together, where we have the my list We set the adapter based on the adapter of the list adapter. The list adapter populates, this is how it works. The list adapter populates the view user entry XML, which is a layout that actually displays all user entry. And we create the list view, which is actually sitting in the activity main. You know, we create an object for it, and we set the adapter based on the object adapter of the simple adapter which was created earlier. I think you understand how this flows. So we're going to display the sync status of the SQLite DB now, which is the toast, if it's successful or not. So there comes the PRG dialog, where we initialize the progress dialog with the new progress dialog keyword, and we set the message syncing SQLite data with remote MySQL DB. So it's wait. So when it's actually synchronizing to the MySQL DB, it's actually going to populate this message as a toast. We're going to set cancelable to false at this point. We have on create option menu, nothing has been done on that. We have on option item selected method, whereby we're going to handle action bar item clicks here. No, this is the action bar that will automatically handle the clicks on the home up button. So as long as you specify a parent activity in Android manifest, it's actually going to go back to the parent activity. So this is the essence, where we create an ID of an integer ID, because we're actually going to use an ID to depict each particular activity. Now, if the ID is equals to refresh, what's going to happen? Because there is an action, there's a button right on the action bar. So now we need to make this button work. Well, if a click happens on that particular button, because we've actually set an on-click listener to this, it's going to call on the sync SQLite MySQL DB method, and it's going to return true. We're still going to get to look at what that method does. We have the add user method that was passed somewhere. Okay, let's move on. Well, we're going to add the user method and getting called on clicking the plus button. Now the plus button is on click listener is going to be triggered on it, and it's actually going to call an intent to the new user class. So there's a class, there's an activity that's handling this particular process. Let's get to look at the sync SQLite MySQL database. What's this going to do? We're going to create the async HTTP client object, which is the client. The same to go for the params. We create an object, and we have the user list, which we've actually created earlier, but we're still going to instantiate it here to get all users. Now we're going to check an if, use an if statement to get the size of the user list, to know if it's not equals to 0, just like the way we did over here to actually attach the adapters. Now we're still going to do that, mimic the same approach. Now if the controller DB sync count is also not equals to 0, the dialog shows up. The params is going to put in the JSON. This is when we need to post a link to the insert user PHP, which is actually sitting on the server, when we uploaded the backend codes to the server. So we need a domain to point us down to there. So if you are using a localhost XAMPP WAMP, you also get an IP. There's an IP you generate from that locally, so that is actually going to be pointing to the insert user PHP. We need that very much here. On success, we're going to print line the response. Now we're going to hide the progress dialog when there's a success. So during this process, there's going to be a try and catch method. The try is actually going to loop through the array that was gotten, whereby it's going to set the ID and the status appropriately. So the toast is going to come out that the sync is completed. It's actually going to sync up the data. And if there's an error, there's going to be a catch, a JSON exception, because you're actually passing a JSON here to the insert user PHP. So from the insert user PHP, there are instructions there to actually save those data into the MySQL DB. I've explained that earlier in the first part. So if you are just picking this now, I will employ you to just take a step backwards, get the backend explanation so that you get to understand how these integrates with each other. Now there's going to be an error code if there is a JSON exception. That's cool. That sets the application cool and ready. Let's get to look at the DB controller because we have a functionality here. It's actually going to store the data to where the SQLite database, and afterwards there'll be the access to synchronize those saved data to the SQLite database to the MySQL DB right on the server. Now we have a DB controller that extends the SQLite open helper. A constructor comes here where we set the superclass of the constructor to the constructor rather, and we assign a string Android SQLite DB, which is actually going to be the name of the DB of this particular SQLite database. Now we're going to create a table. On create, we set the query string. What this query is going to attach is going to hold on to a value, which is actually going to be the SQL syntax or the SQL create statement. So what are you going to create in? A table called users with the fields of user ID, which is going to be integer, primary key. These are attributes of the user ID. The username is going to be a text data type, and we have the update status too, which is actually going to be a text data type. Most times this is also a variable character, but for this particular syntax, SQLite database use text. Now you're going to execute the query because the query is a string that is going to hold on to a value. Now the database executes is actually going to execute that query. We have for the on upgrade, where we call on the database object from the SQLite database class, and even we need the version old integer data type and the current version, the old and the current version, so that we'll be able to upgrade appropriately. Now with the same thing goes, we still have the query. Now we're going to drop table if exists uses. That's the statement. You're going to execute that query, and on create, you create the database. So if the table exists, you drop the table and create the table users. That's just how it flows. We have the insert user method here. That was somewhere around, I think it was called around, okay, it still gets all users. We get to look at that. Let's get back here. Insert users, we have the database object, we have the get writable database. This is a method from the SQLite database that is actually going to write the syntax or the query into a database. That's just it. And we have the values with the content values. That is going to be a content right in it. And this is the essence of the inserting, whereby we create an object. Now we're going to put some content. The username, the update status. The update status will be no at default, and we're going to insert these values into the users table. We close the database. We're going to list the users from the SQLite DB because now we've inserted to the SQLite DB. Now we have to list those values. We're going to use the array list because it's going to actually be a sort of loop. We get all users method. So this is the method that I mentioned right in the main activity. Get all users method. So it's actually going to get all users. We have the word list object that was created from the array list. We instantiate with the array list, just to make it usable. Now we create a select query. So what's the statement like? Select all from users. Same thing goes for the database. So you get the writable database to write the selected values. Now we need a cursor to actually point us down there. Now we have to move to first, because it's actually going to iterate on each set of data, because we are actually selecting all data from the table. So we have to be specific on the particular ID, username, status of each data that we're picking out. So that's why we need the cursor to move, iterate us through and move to first. So as this, we use a do while loop. While the cursor moves to next, what's going to happen is actually going to put the user ID, the username, into the map, the hash map, to actually save it out for us, because we create a map from the hash map class. We create a map object. So that's what this is doing. We close up the database and we return the word list value, because now we add it up to the map that the values that we're getting, the user ID, username, as a parameter here. So the word list is very, very important right there. Now we need to compose the JSON from Sqlite. This is when we need to probably update the status. The same thing goes for how we've done the previous method, the array list, the word list. Now the query is going to look like this. Select all from users where the update status equals to no. Now that we get the writable database, we need to iterate through these values in the Sqlite database so while we move to next, we're going to be getting the user ID, username, and we attach it to the map object created from the hash map, which will also be passed to the word list values array list object created earlier. So now we close up the DB. We need the JSON, to create up. We need the JSON builder to create this up. So we use the JSON to serialize array list to JSON. We have to convert that to JSON. So JSON to JSON. So word list is very important here, so that it's going to actually update this successfully. We also have some few methods here. The DB count, where we're going to actually select all from users where the status equals to no, to count how many of the status are still no. And this is when we need to now update it. When the user sets the update status based on the status, where the user ID based on the ID, we get to update the value so that we won't continue to duplicate entries. That's cool. Let's get to look at the manifest, the Android manifest. There's a permission very important here. The Android internet, we need the internet, allow us to use the internet. And at the same time, we're going to allow application to write to SD card. That's why we need the right external storage. Very important. And we used another activity, which is the new user activity, that actually going to show up the user. Let's get to quickly look at the new user activity. This extends activity where we have the edit text. This actually takes up the user input. We have the DB controller, which was instantiated, create a controller from this. Now we call on the add new user layout. This is when you add the new user. So it's actually a new activity on its own. So this is where we get the input value. The edit text get the view by ID, the username, we pass it to the username variable. So we add the new user based on the username that was gotten from the edit text. That's just so if there's an error, say please enter the username. And we call home activity. That's when we pass the intent to the main activity, back to the main activity. So you navigate back to the home screen. That's cool. I'll be uploading the source file of this particular application to my GitHub account, and I'll be showing the screencast of this tutorial so that you can actually see how it flows. After synchronizing the data to the server, so let's get to look at it in the phpMyAdmin. This is the users table. A click on the users table populates the ID and name fields. Can you see the first ID? One, Delaware Studios. The second, Smith Peters. The third, Bamidele. So you can see that the sync actually was done successfully, and it actually populates to the backend DB. So this is actually working perfectly, and it's actually efficient to use. Thank you very much for hanging out with me throughout this session, from the part 1 down to the concluding session of this magnificent tutorial of how to synchronize Sqlite database, which is right sitting on the mobile phone, to the live server or to the MySQL DB server somewhere, probably online, probably locally. You can actually implement this with it. Thank you guys for hanging out with me. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Have a wonderful day. Bye bye.